Hi, and welcome to season 2 of Asteria's Combos, where we're community building the future. I'm your host, Asteria Elzea, hosting from unceded Tongva land. Identify strongly as a farm girl thanks to my childhood on the traditional lands of the Sauk and Fox peoples. I'm also chronically ill, non binary, neurodivergent, and polyamorous. And I'm a practicing witch. My life is super affected by my PTSD, as well as my white settler ancestry. I've spent the last decade training in human connection to connect to ourselves, to people different than us, and to be in community with each other. I'm highly trained in attachment and trauma-informed group facilitation. My work history is widely varied: theatrical technician, special events coordination, bud tender, at a dispensary, t-shirt shop manager, and data analyst. I hope this podcast is informed by all my experiences and my education, in addition to my guests. Season 2 has a thread flowing through it about how our hope for the future is learning to have more intentional collaboration with others. We must build coalitions, and we must look out for each other. Let's get down to business. Hi, and welcome to Asteria's Combos, where we're community building the future. I'm going to let today's guest introduce themselves while I stand up and light a candle for us today.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Sarah Kathleen Wilson, and I am formerly a registered social worker and clinical hypnotherapist. And I guess I lead with the identities of being neuroqueer, living with chronic illness, being a third and fifth generation settler in Canada, with most of my family coming from England, Scotland, and Germany. And yeah, do you want me to start talking about my work, or you're going to ask me questions about
I'm going to ask you questions now.
Okay.
What does neuroqueer mean to you?
Oh, that's such a big question. Yeah, I guess neuroqueer means, it's both claiming like a neurodivergent identity and label while also being a little bit more politicized in the sense that I am queer. And the reason I use that language is for like a political orientation of being, yeah, just sort of like in opposition to the state, to normative identities, to normative expectations. Yeah, and I just think it's a little bit more expansive than any kind of psychiatric labels or diagnostic labels.
Yeah, absolutely. I also love neuroqueer as a label. Not that I necessarily claim it myself, but I love it as a label because it's got that politicized action in it because of the queer community's history. And
Mhm.
we really do need to acknowledge the history of like violence against the neurodivergent community as well.
Okay.
And how many queer people that overlaps with. A lot of queer people are so neurodivergent. It's
Mhm.
almost a Venn diagram that's a circle.
It is, absolutely. And, I think I like that as well because to me, it's like more expansive
Yeah.
than drilling it down. And I don't know how much I'm allowed to swear on your podcast, but I've always sort of identified as queers and like queers and like it's none of your business, right? Because
Yeah.
I think often this pressure on queer folks to self-identify, to talk about, are you bisexual? Are you this? Like, what's your gender? To have all these like really deep explanations about yourself, often with strangers when it's none of their business. And similarly, picking particular labels of neurodivergence, I think like that's a lot of information for me to share with strangers, and I'm happy to share that with people closer to me.
Yeah.
But I like queer as this encapsulation of like, I'm in solidarity with this community of other folks that are neurodivergent and queer, and like information beyond that is not necessarily
It's
your
not.
business unless we're in relationship, right?
Yes, absolutely. Also, there is a Pansy Division song, and they're a big punk queer band from the 90s
Yeah.
called Queer as in Fuck You.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
like, yeah, that's where we
Queers
are.
and fuck the police, right? Like all of those
Yeah.
things, So it's just
Be
like
gay, do crime. Like, yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely.
So what's your work in the world?
Yeah, I mean, my work in the world is pretty I'm one of those people that kind of dabbles in a whole lot of different things, but I think there are obviously some through lines. Professionally, I'm a registered social worker and clinical hypnotherapist. I currently work in private practice, and I also work with the Comox Valley Hospice Society as a support worker and counselor doing palliative work, bereavement work, anticipatory grief support. Beyond that, more informally, I do a lot of care work and community organizing. I support lots of my friends. Being a queer person, many of my friends are also queer and neurodivergent and living with chronic illness and disability. So lots of sort of what I think of as sort of like invisibilized labor. And then I do a lot of community organizing in the queer community, creating queer spaces, doing work with mutual aid programs, that kind of thing. Most recently, I've stepped away from it as I moved to the Comox Valley a few months ago. But for the last 3 years, I was involved in the development and creation of a queer sort of therapeutic space in Victoria that was home to like 20 different queer counselors, therapists, body workers, practitioners, all kind of working together in a shared office space in downtown Victoria. So I was doing that for 3 years. Yeah, I do a lot of work.
You do, and it's like it's so community based and so well connected, the work that you do. I'm especially interested in the grief work
Mhm.
because we're going through a time with a lot of grief right now,
Mhm.
collectively.
Mhm.
And also, it's so hard for a lot of people to sit with grief.
Mhm.
Would you talk more about your grief work and what that looks like?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly feel like in a lot of ways, grief is often like the through line of a lot of my work because in my private practice, I really specialize a lot in chronic illness and disability and supporting people and having that sort of like collapse orientation. And so I really think of and conceptualize, obviously nods to Francis Weller, who I've trained with, thinking of grief beyond just the loss of a person, but like the loss of identity, the loss of capacity, the loss of ability. So working in chronic illness and disability, we do a lot of grief work. I think collectively we're going through a bit of a grief process right now as like, I mean, some of us that have been doing that collapse oriented work have gone through that process a lot earlier, but I think a lot of people are starting to wake up to like, oh, like the future and the life that we had imagined and the sort of things that we underpinned or thought were shared values for us collectively as a society are not necessarily there, right?
Yeah.
And then obviously, yeah, like lots of grief work, right? Like my background is doing lots of harm reduction work and working in the HIV community. So I've been pretty on the front lines of the drug toxicity crisis for a long time. So doing a lot of my own grief work, dealing with a lot of cumulative loss and
Yeah.
supporting a lot of other people that are like in these communities that are just absolutely devastated by loss. People suffering like multiple losses kind of over and over and over again. And the intensity of that and sort of navigating this weird space where I'm often in communities where there's a lot of death happening and then kind of going out into the sort of the more sort of default world where people are like really afraid to talk about death and dying and sort of navigating this like weird in between space between those two things has been really interesting and complicated.
Yeah. It's so interesting, and it's been a topic that I've, like, read books about. Like, one of them I read was From Here to Eternity by Caitlin Doughty, which was about different grief practices across the world, but a lot about the way our Westernized society won't deal with grief and refuses to. And so, like, while there are other cultures where they're in relationship with the bones of their ancestors or have like a regular yearly grief ceremony, practice, festival that's days long, or
Mhm.
we are really, as a Westernized society, we try to ignore that death happens.
Mhm.
Also, like prolong bodies for no reason is another thing. Like,
Mhm.
the funeral industry here is so standardized that with the preservation and embalming of corpses and the protection of like putting a body in a big wood box and then putting that wood box in a big metal box and then putting it in the ground.
Yeah.
And And it's hard to change those practices as well. But if we could acknowledge that things are on a cycle and death and decay is part of life, I think that would help us collectively.
Yeah, absolutely. And further to that point, like, I think something that's really missing and that can actually be really helpful, even just from a really practical standpoint, is like that sense of relationship with ancestors, right? Like that's something that we see kind of like cross culturally throughout time all over the world. And yet in our westernized context, we really have this idea of like people just die and then it's done and that relationship is over. And that actually just causes like, that causes a lot of like fear and a lot of distress for people. And so even just gently warming people up to the idea of like, you can continue these relationships with people like after they're gone, that can really like ease a lot of that distress and it can really start to like shift people's perspectives around death and dying because that's really overwhelming and it's really, yeah, there's something that just really lacks like depth about that, right? And it's really like disheartening.
It is. Absolutely. So, how do you build community intentionally?
How do I build community intentionally? Oh, yeah, I love this question, and I also feel like that's a question I could talk about for, like, a really long time,
Great. Let's talk about it for a really long time.
I mean, I would say, like, politically and relationally, like, I'm an anarchist, and so for me, I'm like, well, anything that we can do to be, like, sort of at the micro level, like, building relationships and figuring out how to be, like, less dependent on the state for our needs is, like, what we need to do, and I'm very much, like, a Praxis girly, so it's, like, what are the skills and tools and things that we need to be doing in our interpersonal relationships, and so I really think about community building at this very, like, micro level of, like,
Can I stop you for a second?
Yes.
Can you please explain the word praxis?
Yes.
Yeah.
So praxis is like where we practice our theory, right? So it's like
Yes.
there's often this kind of there's sort of historically been this like weird tension, particularly among anarchists and leftists between like needing to emphasize theory or needing to emphasize like the things that we do. And I'm very much a like the things that we do kind
Yes.
of person, probably because I mean, I'm educated, but I'm also just very like working class and I've been doing work in low income communities for like 20 years. And for me, I've learned so much from like,
Praxis is kind of the praxis is the practicalities of theory.
yeah, it's like where we embody the things that we know. It's like where we take all of that intellectual knowledge and actually turn it into like how we do things differently. And for me, like I've learned so much about community building by like being with people who are like on the street, right? Like seeing how they engage in taking care of each other, seeing how they build networks of care and support, seeing how they show up for each other, even when people have literally nothing, right? So that's kind of, that really obviously informs my work. I've also been very fortunate to be mentored not only by folks in the harm reduction community, but also in the HIV community. And so I really cling to this history of, yeah, just like, how do we show up for each other when people are dying and everything's happening and the state has completely abandoned us? Like, that's a queer history that I claim very deeply. And so for me, in terms of community building, yeah, it's like all of those things, my friend, excuse me, my friend that I've done years and years of community organizing with has also made the move up island with me from Victoria. And like we've been, organizing queer events for like close to a decade. We've done actions and work against police budgets. We've done really important organizing work for youth living with HIV. And like this summer, we're building a garden together. Like he has some garden space in his backyard, and I'm living in a place that I just have a little patio. And so we're going to like grow some food together. So to me, like I think of community building as like all of those things, right? Like I think we often get caught up in thinking it needs to be this really big formal thing, that it has to look really labor intensive or be really complicated, but it can be as simple as just creating networks and care of support with like folks in your community that are disabled, or like figuring out like, oh, you have a garden bed and I don't. So like we're going to grow some food together, and then obviously beyond that, I have done other things like, creating the Queer Care Collective in Victoria and things like that. Like I've certainly done the more sort of what we often think of as like community building. But then I also really think, because I have that orientation towards sort of like praxis, I really think about like every day we get opportunities to make lots and lots of decisions. And every one of those decisions that we get to make can be an opportunity to live into our values and to practice those things that feel really important to us.
Yes, absolutely. 100%. What is the Queer Care Collective?
Oh, so that's the community space that I was involved in setting up in Victoria. That is still there. I started that with 4 of my amazing colleagues and had an office space. Well, it's still there. There's an office space with a bunch of queer practitioners. Yeah, a bunch of us had just been working together for years, kind of disjointed, and just wanted to create a space that was accessible and, yeah, shared office space for various queer counselors, body workers, practitioners, and things like that. So,
Yeah. My next question was going to be about like what kind of practitioners were there.
yeah.
Um, how did you find you said that you guys worked together, but how did you find those people? How did you find the people and how did you like it sounds like maybe you were pretty instrumental in helping it set it up. So how did you find and connect those people and make it a formal thing?
Yeah, I mean, so we all kind of had various relationships through different things. Victoria's a pretty small community, so I kind of know everybody through like 6 different ways.
Yeah.
So I'd been connected with my colleague Cora Bilsker for years because we had just I don't even remember how we met. I think she just approached me as like another queer therapist in town, also doing work in the area of like non-monogamy and those things. And so we had connected years ago. So she was like a just like a coworker, as much as you have a coworker when you're self-employed. And then
Yeah.
Efrain was involved with us. Efrain and I used to throw queer parties, but he was also connected friendship-wise with everyone else in the collective. And same with Tennille and Anna. Like we all just kind of knew each other through both work and also through like queer community events and like the burner community and things like that. And so there was just lots of conversations for years of like, we should get an office space. Like we should all work together. That would be really nice because it can be really isolating working in private practice. And then that kind of, we just kind of ended up in a situation where we had the opportunity to take over quite a large space with 11 rooms. And then we're like, okay, well, like, let's like bring in other people. And so just kind of like through relationships that we had and then putting the word out to the community, like getting other folks involved. So,
That's so cool.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, how are you looking towards the future with your actions?
Mm. Yeah, that's such a good question. And yeah, I mean, I think it kind of goes back to a lot of the things that we were talking about earlier in terms of like that community building and developing those skills. I'd say I've been pretty collapse oriented for, oh gosh, maybe like close to a decade. Like
Yeah, that's like
probably,
a pretty long time to be collapse oriented.
I know. And honestly, it was like one of those weird things where like I was kind of the person that people were like, Sarah, this is like really depressing. You can't keep talking about the apocalypse, you know? Like it's a little overwhelming for people. And then the pandemic happened.
Yeah.
Right? And it was like, didn't want to like I didn't want to be right in that kind of way, you know, like that's not a good thing. But also I was kind of like, this is what I've been talking about. Like this is the kind of stuff that we need to be preparing for, whether that's future pandemics or climate change or those kinds of things. And so yeah, just all of that kind of skill building, right? Like at that micro level of like gardening, and I do a lot of food preserving and all of those things to that wider piece of like, okay, I'm like really deepening into my skills in, being a grief worker. And I'm kind of shifting or like over the past couple of years, I've really shifted in my professional work because I've been doing care work for the better part of oh gosh, like 2 decades now. And so I've really shifted in the last couple of years into the work that I do in my private practice. I'm really focused a lot on like mentoring and working with other care workers and other people doing frontline work and kind of supporting them, realizing that I have quite a bit of experience in that area. And so kind of like shifting in that way. And so just, yeah, I'm doing whatever I can to kind of like develop like skills as well as like supporting other people to develop their skills so that hopefully, we're a little more prepared as things come, and I think we're just gonna continue to see more of that, right? Like, more food shortages, more more inflation, more all of that kind of stuff, and so,
Yeah. I
again, just
definitely got really overwhelmed thinking last night about how much worse things are gonna get. Like,
yeah, I know. I know.
wow. It brings me
And
right to tears actually, but like,
yeah, I know.
um, we are here in LA, and I've talked about this on the podcast several times, but the community here has been collapsing for several years because of the film industry collapse.
Mm-hmm.
And as we record this, which won't come out for a month or so, Donald Trump just instituted the 100% tax on foreign films, which is feeling to people. And then IATSE was like, no, you can't do that. You know nothing about what you're doing, which
Mm-hmm.
IATSE is the film union. And just like it feels like another nail in the coffin for making films here.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's the nonprofit industry, which is where I was working before. And I was working with a company that was really trying to make change by instituting people like on the highest level of nonprofits. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and they were having so much trouble with boards and with boards of directors because of who is typically on boards of
Mm-hmm.
directors for nonprofits, which, and then like just now the nonprofits with the NEH, they're all losing their endowments for the arts. And so the nonprofit industry is collapsing. The film industry is collapsing here. I know people who like worked for the CDC and have lost their jobs. And it's like also such a horrible job market where it's everything is trash, like on the internet. And how do you get a job when everything's trash? And like when everything's like literally spam or a fake job posting, or you interview perfectly for a job and don't get it. So don't
Mm-hmm.
get it because of whatever metrics they've got or personality tests, or like the community care is coming in at such a basic level.
Mm-hmm.
People, it's coming in at housing already. It's coming in at food. We can like, what food can we provide for each other? How do we help each other get healthcare?
Mm-hmm.
And then it's just going to get worse. Like the shelves are going to get emptier.
I know.
And
Yeah.
they're going to get more expensive.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's going to affect all the other countries because I'm
Mm-hmm.
in the US and you're in Canada. So luckily you did that election really well.
Uh, yeah, sort
Yeah.
of.
Sort of well. At least it didn't go the worst way.
It didn't go the worst possible way, but I'm still not particularly pleased with the outcome. But yeah, I mean, things are super precarious, right? And it's only going to continue to get precarious. And yeah, I think that's really interesting. I mean, similarly here, like I know the film industry in Vancouver has really suffered. And I actually work with quite a few clients who work in the university system. And something that's happened in Canada is we've been kind of pinning our housing woes on immigration, which is like a whole topic I'm not going to get into, but like the government has decided to like rapidly scale back into great like immigration, and what that's done is pretty much like decimated the university system because our universities were so reliant on international students for generating revenue, and now there are all these folks that had what they believed were these like very secure jobs that are not secure anymore, right? Whether they're working in support roles or even working as instructors and professors in universities, like those folks are seeing like mass layoffs. And so you just think like folks that have a PhD are struggling in the job market. Like, I don't know what hope there is for the rest of us, right? Like that just brings like this, there's like this really intense kind of precarity when we see these sort of like institution things that felt very secure.
I have a
Right.
friend that's like a white male developer that like programmer has a great resume. He's so intelligent, like went to college at 14, kind of intelligent, and comes off really well in interviews. People feel like he's tall and has this gravitas, right? People love him.
Mhm.
And he's been applying for jobs for 15 months and can't get one. And what am I going to do with my messy resume where I've had gaps and I have a like backstage theater work and special events background? And then like, what am I going to do with my resume? I worked in a cannabis dispensary for the
Yeah.
last couple years and then changed to data analysis right when that was going out. And like, it's just so wild the life we've lived as like millennials.
I know,
Just
right?
recession to recession to recession.
Recession to recession to recession. And yeah, and this is something that comes up often in my client work, right? Is like we were just really sold this idea. Like I think we were the kind of this first generation that was sold this idea of like, you need to go to university and then you're gonna get this like stability, right? And we're in this weird predicament where I believe we're like the most well-educated generation to ever exist. And yet we seem to be facing like the most intense economic precarity, right? Because even just ahead of us, some of those like Gen X folks, like they got into the housing market before it collapsed, right? Like I finished university in 2007. The year after, there was like this major economic recession in 2008. And so it's just been kind of like, and then it's like you finally get your way back from that. And then the pandemic happens, and then the next thing, and the next thing. And yeah, and I feel like that's just like this age of precarity is just kind of what we're, like that's just what we're in. And that's just what it's going to like continue
Continue to be. It feels
to
like
be. And it's exhausting. It's exhausting,
it's
right? It's
exhausting.
exhausting
It
to be
feels
like,
to me like we're at this like, yeah, we've been on the precarity the whole time and we're like
mhm.
getting ready to like ride the rock downhill or something.
Totally.
Like just
Yeah, like this
down.
hope of like, oh, it'll level out at some point, like, and I think as we kind of like approach our like midlife and our middle age, like, I don't know about you, but I feel a lot older than I think I'm supposed to at this age, because I feel like we've just seen
Yeah.
so much, right? Like being in high school during like 9/11 and then finishing university as this economic collapse happens, and then the next and the next. And it's like, oh, like all of these, like kind of what we were talking about earlier is like that grief work of like, oh, the world that I thought existed
Doesn't.
is not, that's not
It
real,
just
right?
doesn't.
It doesn't exist.
I think I'm a little bit younger than you. And so like I was in 4th grade when 9/11 happened.
Okay.
And
I was in high school.
yeah, and I graduated from high school in 2010 and like I really thought my career was getting going and then I had 3 months of work coming up and I was about to get in the union when the pandemic happened. And yeah, it's just been tough. I'm not here to just like complain about it being tough, obviously, but this is like the reality of the situation is that we're here and the next steps are what do we do to take care of each other because clearly the government's not going to. Like that's where
Yeah,
we're at.
that's totally where we're at, and I think that, I think for a lot of people, that's really overwhelming and that's really shattering, right? And
Yeah.
so I think for a lot of folks, that does lead to this sort of like shutdown, this overwhelm, this kind of like freeze state, right? And yeah, I guess I feel like a bit privileged or at a bit of an advantage having done some of the work that I've done and having had this sort of mentorship of yeah, like people who, were long-term survivors of the AIDS crisis and things like that, who were like, no, there was no medication and the government didn't come to help us. And we, had all this intense stigma when we were in the hospital and we did all these things. And so this is what we did instead, right? Like this is how we supported each other. This is how, that was like the development of where palliative care came from. That's what set the framework for, what later became the harm reduction movement. And so for me, like I really have been fortunate to see where like grief can become this really like powerful catalyst for social change and can become this thing that if we can actually encounter it honestly and work through it and move through that freeze and overwhelm, then there is something on the other side that can actually be really impactful and we can actually show up for each other and that we have a lot of capacity to do that. And I often feel disappointed in people's like inability or unwillingness to show up for people in those ways. And I get that we're all, busy and working a lot and doing those things. But I just really feel like as someone who's, yeah, sort of collapse oriented and future oriented, I feel like now's the time to like practice and work on and get real about what's actually happening because it is going to get worse. Right. And so like we have an opportunity now to kind of practice and deepen into those skills because we're really going to need them in
Yeah.
a few years, not to be
Yeah. So I'm
not to be a bit of a like doomsayer.
kind of a position right now in my recordings where I'm taking a pause from putting episodes out. And in that pause, I'm working on like developing a program that's going to be about community building and like practical skills that people can learn. It's going to be like 2 sessions a week. Right now, in the form I'm working on it right now, it's going to be like 2 sections a week, and one of them's a lesson and the other one's a practice with the group,
Okay.
because you have to practice these community skills.
Totally. You have to. You have to
You have to. A lot of people don't have the resilience built be in grief with other people or to hold the space for hard times. And we're going to be in such hard times. And the more we can hold each other through it, the better skills we have,
Mhm.
the more ease we can create. And the more we can move towards, like, the more we have practiced visioning a better future, the more we can move towards that future because we have a active thing to look at. You have the practicalities of the steps you need to take to get the future you want to have.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I love that you've been on the front edge of that for a decade. Yeah. What are some practical things you've learned from your work with the AIDS community? Like, what
Oh.
did they tell you they practically did for each other?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it was really just, like, figuring out, like, community care, right? Like, a lot of it was like, okay, like, people need home care, people need meals, people need, people to, like, sit with them as they're dying, people need them, to provide, like, emotional support, and then people really went beyond that, and many of the organizations that I worked with in Victoria were started because people were getting together around a kitchen table to be like, okay, like no one is coming to save us. What can we do? What do we need? What does our community need? Right. Whether that's, in the early days, a lot of that was like palliative care and a lot of it was lobbying for medication and those kinds of things. And then kind of going beyond that to like social support and where do we create spaces where people can feel safe and supported. Yeah, I think those are kind of like the big takeaways. Is really, for me, it really always comes back to that sort of like relational piece. And that's kind of where I start everything is like out of building relationships that are like actually like deep and meaningful, then we find those opportunities to do that work. And I've learned so much in my organizing work about like moving through conflict and doing all that kind of stuff. And like you don't really get those skills and you don't really get that opportunity when you're just going to work and you're not actually engaged in those kind of relationships in your community where you're like, okay, well, we can't just like walk away from this. We have to like actually go through this conflict together. And I think also that visioning piece, right? Like that commitment to it doesn't have to be this way and we don't actually have to accept these conditions, right? Like these things are happening, but we can actually do something about it. And sort of that motivation towards actually making change.
Yeah. I definitely want to say to acknowledge that a lot of the visioning piece that I've got has come from like Black vision creators, like
Hmm.
African Americans, Black people that have like Adrienne Marie Brown, a
Hmm.
lot of the speculative fiction I've read, like Octavia Butler. And I just think it's important to acknowledge that idea that vision
Hmm.
is so important comes especially from people of color.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a piece that's like often missing, particularly for like white folks. And I think that's why we can get really stuck in this like reactionary, this overwhelm and this shutdown and in this place of like, oh, all I can do is like, you know, resist or push back on these conditions because there's this like lack of imagination of how it can be different.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? Because like, white folks are really good at forgetting and we've kind of forgotten so deeply what it means to like actually be in community and to be in relationship with each other and be in relationship with our ancestors. And when we're missing that piece and we don't have that idea of like things can actually be different, we can actually live in communities that look different, right? And I think, yeah, like queer folks and Black folks and disabled folks as well. And like,
Yes.
um, you know, the sense of like, we kind of need to go beyond your nuclear family, right? Like we need to be building meaningful, in-depth relationships with people that we're not related to or people who maybe we don't like that much, right? Like they're still deserving of community care and support, even if we're not the best of friends, right? But what does it mean to actually build community and be in a relationship with people, whether we like them or not, or whether it's fun or not, but because it's important and because we're like practicing and living into a different vision of the future, right?
Yeah. I think that repair aspect you highlighted a minute ago is really important too. That most of us don't learn conflict resolution. A lot of white people learn the like waspy avoidance or passiveness.
So avoidant, right? So dissociative.
So avoidant.
So avoidant, so dissociative, just like cut out those toxic people, right? Like whatever.
Yeah.
I'm just move on. This idea that there's like an endless amount of people that you can just replace people with, right? Which is like different when you're in a smaller community, right? Whether that's like a smaller community proximity, but also like, being in the queer community, a lot of the time it's like, well, this is all there is, So it's like you can't really just kind of like throw people away. It's like you're gonna see them again. You're gonna have to continue to be in community with them. So you might as well figure out how to make this work, right?
Yeah. And people shouldn't be thrown away because they're having a hard time.
No, nobody
Some
should
of
be thrown
them are
away.
like, yeah, no one should be thrown away, first of all. And
Period.
there are truly toxic people, and like I've cut my mother out of my life because she was crazy and manipulative my whole life, and I can't repair that relationship with her. But there
Mhm.
are other people that we can repair with, and I think non-monogamy has taught me a lot about building relational relationships that actually have repair in them, or being in community with people that, like, generally I like, but sometimes I don't like that trait. And,
Yeah.
you know, but we still want to keep working towards being in relationship with each other. And that means that both of us put the effort in and that we keep
Mhm.
talking and communicating about needs. And instead of just like sweeping stuff under the rug and ignoring it, and then things get worse and more resentful and more competitive, like talk about it clearly and effectively. And now we've built a stronger relationship than we would have had if it
Mhm.
was the brittleness of ig- ignoring it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So, yeah. What are you here to promote?
Mm. What am I here to promote? That feels like such an interesting swerve from
Well,
this conversation.
that's still so fair. And like some of the people that have come on have been here to promote pleasure or here to promote
Mm,
concepts like relationship building, or they've
mhm.
been here to promote their work,
Yeah.
or here. I just, and I use the word promote specifically in a provocative way. I know it makes most of the people I have on uncomfortable because it feels like a marketing word and it feels like you have to sell yourself. And a lot of the people I have on are very uncomfortable with that idea. But there's a lot of things we can promote and work towards that aren't capitalism.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I just mean it just feels like a shift to start to, I don't know, talk more formally about my work. And
Yeah.
yeah, I guess, I mean, I do like the idea of, yeah, that's sort of like promoting different like values. And I feel like we've done a lot of that over the last little bit as we've been chatting. I would like to make a little plug. I did put out a prenatal hypnosis course last year that I need to actually do a much better job of of promoting because I've developed a sort of self-paced prenatal hypnotherapy program that's suitable for not only queer folks and folks with like different family orientations, but folks having kind of like any kind of birth, including cesarean sections. I've done prenatal hypnosis work for a long time, and I really saw that as like a huge gap. I've been really blessed, obviously, to work with folks that are queer and trans and non-monogamous in doing my prenatal hypnotherapy work. And I saw like a real need for something that was just very like financially accessible that folks could like work through on their own time. So that is something that I do have
Is it
available.
very gender affirming as well? Since
Is
you,
it Yes, yes,
Yeah.
it's very just like science-based. So there's no real references to any kind of like I make no assumptions about the gender or the experience of the person who's listening. It's really more just like this is what's going on in your body when you're having a baby, and these are the things that are helpful as you approach birth in terms of like trusting your own body, being able to advocate for yourself within the medical system, and sort of like a deep dive into the science of all of the amazing things that happen
And
as the body is growing a life. Yeah.
for people whose only interaction with hypnosis is like the movie idea of it, what's a hypnotherapy course?
Okay. Yeah, so it's like 5? Yeah, so there's 5 audio recordings. They're about 40 to yeah, 40 minutes in length, 30 to 40 minutes in length, and you kind of work through them sequentially. And it's very much like a guided meditation, but it obviously goes a little bit deeper than that, in that we go into, yeah, lots of visualizations, a little bit more into depth of examining sort of like unconscious beliefs and releasing fears. And yeah, just kind of like helping your body and mind sort of like prepare for the experience of giving birth in terms of, people are always often worried about like pain control and those kinds of things. There's a huge emphasis on like prenatal bonding, which I think my feedback from clients over the years is that's been sort of like their favorite part of the course. And so just like having that time to really deep dive into spending that time like really deeply focused on your body, feeling your baby moving around within you, like developing that sort of like connection between you and your baby before you welcome them into the world. And like for me, my whole thing has always been obviously, doing prenatal hypnosis. I work with a lot of folks that are very like anxious and overwhelmed and stressed and nervous and scared about what it's going to be like. And for me, I just feel like the prenatal period is such a brief time, right? Like if you're lucky, you get a full 9 months and it's just this like brief little window. And I just feel like if people can kind of be supported to release all of that anxiety, then they can actually just like enjoy that time. And so for me, I'm like, I really want people to just like really be able to savor and enjoy that experience because it's often just like maybe once or twice in your life, do you really get to go through that. And so giving people the opportunity to really settle into and take that time to just enjoy that and experience it.
That's absolutely beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah. I've definitely never heard pregnancy talked about in that way.
Oh.
I think it's often talked about like a burden and it's really hard and there's all the anxiety and just the point you made about how it only happens once or twice in most people's lives if it does happen to them.
Mhm,
And then I think we often try to rush through it
mhm,
and get it over with and get to having the baby and having w- what an interesting point to feel into your body and to connect with yourself and your child before they're even born.
mhm.
Yeah. What is can you remind people your name and like what's your website where can they find your prenatal hypnotherapy course?
Yeah, so my name is Sarah Kathleen Wilson, and you can actually just find me at sarahkathleenwilson.com, and you'll find more there. You can find my prenatal hypnosis course there, as well as learn more about my work and my background.
Do you have any social medias
I
that are
do. I
relevant?
have an Instagram account that I don't update very often.
Yeah, sure, me too.
Yeah.
Do you wanna say the handle?
Oh, do I know what it is? I think it's just Sarah K. Wilson,
Yeah.
I think.
Okay, cool. Great. Well, that's awesome. Do you have anything else you wanna say before we are finished?
I'm just really, yeah, I think I just really appreciated having this conversation today. I really appreciate all your questions. And yeah, it was really nice to just kind of like, I always love being able to have these conversations about like grief and collapse and community building. And yeah, I'm excited to see more about your course and to know more about the like skills that you're going to be helping people learn. It reminds me a little bit of kind of like I don't know if you're familiar with like anarchist summer schools and things like that, where people kind of like come together and spend time, yeah, just like figuring out like what are those community building skills that we need and what do we need to learn and how do we practice doing that together. I just think that practice piece is so important because if you're not already involved in community organizing or social justice work, then I think sometimes it can be hard for people to find the like entry point, like people often say that people will often tell me they have these values and they believe in these things and it's really important to them, but they just don't know where to start. They don't know where to begin. They don't know how to get connected. They don't know what to do. And so I think making it so much more like open and easy for people to find that doorway in is really, really important.
Thank you so much. I don't know about anarchist summer schools, but I did probably 2017. I went to an anarchist unconference where people
Mhm.
were all teaching each other like skills or
Yeah, it
about,
would be like that.
yeah. And I think that is one of the things that really radicalized me. And the friend that invited me to that was,
Yeah.
yeah, just this idea that we all have valuable skills that we can be teaching each other and learning from each other. And I didn't know about a lot of the racial, like one of the conference sections I went to was about jails,
Mhm.
like writing to prisoners and
Yeah.
stuff. And I didn't know about the abolition movement at all
Mhm.
when I first went. And so I, yeah, what a great mention on the anarchist summer schools. Thank you so much for coming on. This has been a really great conversation. And
Mhm.
I'm so glad for what you bring to the world and that you brought
Oh,
it.
thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Asteria's Combos. If you'd like to donate to the show and support my work, you can go to kofi.com/asteriasrest. That's ko-fi.com/asteriasrest. You can also buy my digital illustrations or hire me for life or values coaching on my shop, which is on stargirlcreative.com. You can also read about me there and find out anything else about what I work on. For speaking and workshops, you can email me at asteria@stargirlcreative.com. And if you just want to follow me and keep up, follow me on at asteria.elzea on Instagram and Threads. I'm so glad you're here and see you soon. We're Asteria's Convos, where we're community building the future.